The wind was the only thing that moved. It soared through the high pines, carrying the scent of wood smoke and ruin. Silas tried to move his arm, but it was a dead thing, pinned beneath him. The pain was a distant, frozen ache. He was on his side, his face pressed into the snow. The snow beneath his shoulder was dark, not red. It was too cold to be red. It was a black, frozen stain. He forced his eyes open. The sky was a sheet of iron, promising more snow before dark. He tried to breathe deep, and a sharp fire shot through his ribs. Broken. They had kicked him. He remembered that now. They had kicked him after he fell. He pushed himself up with his one good hand. The world spun in a grey and white blur. He tasted blood in his mouth, frozen to his teeth. He spat. It landed softly on the snow. His camp was gone. Where his lean-to had been, there was only a patch of blackened snow and the steaming skeletal remains of the pine poles. His traps, stacked neatly just yesterday, were scattered. Some were broken, the metal jaws bent backward by a heavy stone. His winter stores, the dried jerky, the bags of pemmican, the parched corn, were ripped open and thrown into the snow, an offering to the whiskey jacks and the cold. They had taken his horse, they had taken his rifle, they had taken his furs. A whole season's work. 3 months of ice water traps, of skinning in the dim light, of plews scraped and stretched and bundled, prime beaver, soft marten, a few fox, all of it gone. But they had not just robbed him. They had done this. They had burned his shelter. They had broken his tools. They had left him with a bullet in his shoulder and cracked ribs, knowing the cold would finish the job. It was a special kind of cruelty, a cruelty born of greed and speed. They were not mountain men. They were something else, something rotten. He dragged himself toward the fire pit. It was just grey ash and wet. Black wood. Dead. He had 2 flints in his possible sack, but his hands were numb. He wasn't sure he could feel them. He wasn't sure he could strike a spark even if he had dry tinder, and they had left him no tinder. He looked at the ruin. This was his valley. He had trapped it for 5 seasons. He had honored it. He never took the young. He never trapped out a lodge. He lived with it. And these men, these shadows had undone it all in an hour. He felt the cold seeking his bones. It was a patient enemy. It would find his heart soon. He could just lie down. He could sleep. It would be easy. But then he looked north. He couldn't see them, but he knew they were there, beyond the pass, beyond the frozen spine of the world, the Bitterroot Range, the valley of the Salish. The people who called him Sio, brother. He had no food, no fire, no weapon. His shoulder was a block of ice and agony. It was 100 miles, 100 miles of winter. He pushed himself to his knees. He looked at the smoking ruin of his life. He looked at the hard grey sky. He would not die here. He would not give them that. He would walk. He would crawl, if he had to. He had a debt to call in. An old debt, a debt of honor. He found his walking stick half burned and used it to stand. The wind cut through his coat, but he did not feel it. He felt only the single hot spark of a promise. He took 1 step, then another. The fire crackles and the shadows on the walls grow long. This is a hard part of the story, but it must be told. It's a tale that lives in the wind, that blows down from those peaks. A reminder of what men will do for greed and what one man will do for honor. If you're listening by your own fire, perhaps in a place far from the mountains, let me know in the words below where this story finds you tonight. We are all neighbors when a tale is shared by the light of the flames. It had been a good season. Only 3 days ago the world was sharp and bright. The air was so cold it felt clean in his lungs. The beaver moon had come and gone, and the pelts were thick and heavy. Silas worked his trap line in the valley, his moccasins making no sound on the pine needles. He moved like water, a part of the place. He passed the great lodge at the bend in the river, the one the Salish called the old man's house. He left it alone. It was sacred. It was the heart of the valley. He was not a rich man, but he was a man who lived well. He had his rifle, his horse, and the respect of the land. And he had allies. Years ago, he had found a young Salish hunter named Broken Hand. The boy's leg was caught in a rock slide, the bone white and sharp through the skin. Silas had given up his trapping season. He had stayed with the boy for 2 weeks, setting the leg, hunting for them both, keeping the wolves at bay with his fire. When the boy was strong enough, Silas had carried him 50 miles back to the Bitterroot. The boy's father, the chief Many Ravens, had held Silas's face in his hands. He had declared a life debt. "My lodge is your lodge," the chief had said, his voice quiet but strong as stone. "My blood is your blood. The Salish of the Bitterroot do not forget." Silas had never called on that debt. It was not a thing to be used lightly. It was a bond, a warmth against the hard winters. It was enough just to know it was there. Then, 2 days ago, they had ridden in. There were 4 of them, led by a man named Elias Thorn. Thorn was a big man with a loud voice and dead eyes. He wore a store-bought coat that was already torn, and he rode his horse hard. His men were shadows, hollowed-out men who followed his cruelty. They weren't free trappers, not really. They were rumors from St. Louis, men who worked for the big companies, sent to clear the mountains of competitors and natives, to take everything and leave nothing. They found Silas skinning a marten by his fire. "This is good country," Thorn said, not asking, but stating. He spat a plug of tobacco near Silas's boot. "It provides," Silas said, not looking up from his work. "It'll provide for us now," one of the shadows said, laughing. "I trap this valley," Silas said quietly. "I trade with the Salish. There is a balance here." Thorn laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Balance? There's no balance, old man, only pelts, and we'll take 'em. You're either working for us or you're in our way." "I work for no man," Silas said, "and I share the valley. I don't own it, neither do you." "The Salish," Thorn sneered. "We heard you were a squaw man, living on their scraps. They won't help you. Their honor is just wind. We'll be back tomorrow. We're taking this valley. You can leave or you can be buried here. Makes no difference to me." Silas had stood his ground. "You are not welcome here, Thorn. This is a peaceful place. Do not bring your war." Thorn's eyes had narrowed. He looked at Silas's bundles of plues, stacked and ready. He looked at Silas's strong horse. He looked at the lone trapper, and he saw only weakness. He saw profit. "We'll see about that," Thorn had said. Silas knew they would be back. He had spent the night cleaning his rifle, preparing. He was a good shot. He was one man, but he was of the mountain. He would defend his home. He had barred his small lean-to. He had kept his horse close. He had waited. But they didn't come in the night. They waited. They waited until dawn, when he went to check his first trap at the river's edge. He was 100 yards from his rifle when they stepped out of the trees. It had been an ambush. The fight was not a fight. It was a beating. They hit him from behind. The butt of a rifle came down on his shoulder, and he felt the bone give way. He fell. They gathered around him. Thorn stood over him, rifle aimed at his head. "I told you, old man, this ain't your valley no more. This is Salish land," Silas spat, the blood rising in his throat. "This is our land," Thorn said. He kicked Silas in the ribs, once, twice. Silas heard the crack. "You and your red friends, you're ghosts. You just don't know it yet." One of his men raised a pistol. "Finish him, Elias. Let's get the furs and go." Thorn smiled. It was the worst part. The smile. "Waste a bullet? No, the cold is free." He looked at Silas, gasping in the snow. "This is what honor gets you, trapper. A lungful of ice." He turned. "Burn it all. Take the furs. Take his rifle. Take the horse. Leave nothing." Silas lay there, helpless, as they destroyed his world. He heard the canvas of his shelter rip. He heard them laugh as they smashed his traps. They were loud. They were clumsy. They were like angry bears, destroying for the sake of destruction. Then came the shot. He thought they had changed their mind. He thought it was for him, but the bullet tore through the flesh of his good shoulder, a hot, searing pain. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to cripple, to ensure the wolves or the cold would come. That's so you don't follow, Thorn laughed. They mounted up. They rode out, his own horse trailing behind them, laden with his own furs. Their laughter echoed off the canyon walls, and then silence. The silence of the snow, the silence of the grey sky. Silas lay there for a long time. The pain was a living thing. The cold was a blanket. Heavy and suffocating. He could feel the sleep pulling at him, the long white sleep, but he thought of Thorn's smile. He thought of the word ghosts. He put his good hand on the frozen earth. He pressed. The pain in his ribs made him black out for a second, but he came back. He was still there. No, he whispered to the wind. It was not a vow of vengeance. Vengeance was a hot, stupid thing. This was colder, it was heavier, it was a matter of justice, it was the code, the law of the high country. You do not leave a man to freeze. You do not steal another man's season. You do not desecrate a valley. He looked north, to the Bitterroot. He began to crawl. He crawled 10 yards, then 20. He used his walking stick to pull himself. Each movement was a universe of pain. But the cold was his friend now. It numbed the wound. It kept the blood frozen. He would not be a ghost. He would be the mountain. And the mountain remembered. He would walk to the Bitterroot. He would stand in the lodge of many ravens. And he would ask, not for himself, but for the balance. He set his jaw. The journey had begun. The journey was a blur of white and grey. The mountain tested him. The wind tried to steal his breath. The snow tried to bury him. He walked. He had no food. On the second day, he found a pine tree, and he chewed the inner bark. It was bitter, but it was something. It kept the hunger from tearing him apart. He moved along the high ridges, avoiding the deep drifts of the valleys. His world shrank to the next tree, the next rock, the next rise. His shoulder was afire, his ribs were glass, but his will was iron. He walked at night and slept in the thin light of day, burying himself in deep snowdrifts to escape the wind. He thought of Thorn, he thought of the laughter, but mostly he thought of many ravens. He thought of the quiet dignity of the Salish. He thought of the debt. On the fourth day, he saw it. The great, wide valley of the Bitterroot. It was still miles away, a dark gash in the white world. He stumbled, he fell. He did not have the strength to get up. He lay in the snow, the valley swimming before his eyes. This was it. He had failed. He closed his eyes. He woke to warmth. He was moving, he was being carried. He smelled wood smoke and horses and smoked leather. He opened his eyes. A face was looking down at him, a strong face marked with old scars and kindness. Broken Hand. Sio, Broken Hand whispered. Brother, what has done this? Silas could not speak. He just gripped the warrior's arm. They brought him to the main lodge, to the fire of many ravens. The chief was older now, his hair the color of the snow, but his eyes were the same. They were the eyes of an eagle. He saw everything. He saw the wound. He saw the broken ribs. He saw the frostbite on Silas's fingers. He said nothing. He simply motioned. The women came. They cut away Silas's frozen shirt. They cleaned the wound with boiled water and moss. They bound his ribs. They pressed hot broth to his lips. Silas drank. Strength returned, a drop at a time. He slept. He woke. The chief was sitting there, patient. Tell me, many ravens said, Silas told him. He spoke of the 4 men, of Elias Thorn, of the stolen furs and the broken rifle, of the burned shelter, and he told him of the last words. He called you ghosts, Silas said, his voice hoarse. He said your honor was wind. He said the valley was his to be emptied. Broken Hand, who had been standing by the lodge door, put his hand on the handle of his knife. But many ravens did not move. His face was calm. This man, many ravens said, he does not know the land. He does not know the code. He believes a man is alone. "He left me to die," Silas said. "I came to ask for the debt. My honor is broken. I have nothing." Many Ravens shook his head slowly. "No, your honor is strong. You are here. You walked the frozen path. You are Sio. The life debt is real. We would give you horses, furs, a new rifle. We would fill your lodge." "That is not what I ask," Silas said, sitting up, the pain flashing in his side. "He is still in my valley. He is still destroying it. He must be answered." A silence fell in the lodge. Broken Hand looked at his father. Many Ravens stood. He was a tall man, still powerful. The life debt is one thing, that is a matter for us, but this man, he has insulted the valley. He has insulted the balance. He calls us ghosts. He turned to Broken Hand. "Send the crier. Tell the hunters to gather. Tell them we ride, not for a man. We ride for the mountain." The word spread. It moved like the wind, from lodge to lodge. That night, the drums beat. It was not a war drum. It was a drum of justice. Hunters came from the high ridges, from the frozen rivers, young men and old warriors. They came with their bows, their lances, their few trade rifles. By dawn, 200 hunters stood silent in the snow-filled clearing. They were not painted for war. They were dressed for a hunt, a great hunt. Silas stood among them. They had given him a horse. They had bound his shoulder tight. Broken Hand rode beside him. 200, Silas whispered, awed. "He said we were wind," Broken Hand said, his eyes cold as the ice. "He will soon learn what the wind can do." They rode out, a silent grey column against the white snow. They moved not like an army, but like a pack of wolves, silent, patient, inescapable. They travelled fast. The Salish knew the high passes, the winter paths that Thorn and his men would never find. They moved in a day the distance it had taken Silas 4 days to crawl. They came to the ridge above Silas's valley. They looked down. Thorn and his men were there. They had built a crude, large fire, wasting wood. They were loud, their voices echoing in the quiet valley. They had set their own traps, dozens of them, clumsy and cruel, along the riverbank. They were celebrating. They were drinking. They thought they were kings. Silas felt the rage rise, but many Ravens put a hand on his good shoulder. "Not rage, Sio. Justice. We are the mountain. We are the cold. We are the silence." He gave the orders, quietly, in hand signals. The 200 hunters melted away. They disappeared into the pine and the aspen. They moved like smoke. They took their places on the ridges, in the trees, behind the rocks. They formed a perfect silent circle around the camp. It took an hour of absolute stillness. When it was done, many Ravens nodded to Silas. "Go. Speak to him." Silas rode his horse down the slope. Alone. Thorn was holding a tin cup of whiskey. He saw Silas. The cup slipped from his fingers. It fell into the snow. His face went pale, as if he truly had seen a ghost. His 3 men scrambled for their rifles. "Silas!" Thorn stammered. You're dead." "The cold didn't want me, Thorn," Silas said, his voice low and carrying in the still air. He stopped his horse 30 yards from their fire. "And the mountain wants you out." Thorn laughed, but it was a brittle, terrified sound. He raised his rifle. "You're still just 1 man, you old fool. We should have finished you." "I am not 1 man," Silas said. He looked at Thorn, and he felt not hatred, but a deep, cold pity. "I am a friend of the Bitterroot. I'm a brother to the Salish, and you are alone." Silas raised his good arm. He gave the eagle cry, the one Broken Hand had taught him. It echoed once, and then, on the high ridge, a single warrior stood, then another, and another. On the rocks to the west, 20 more. In the trees to the east, 30, all around them. 200 silent men, 200 drawn bows. 200 steady rifles, all aimed at the 4 men by the fire. The laughter died in Thorn's throat. His rifle clattered to the snow. His 3 men dropped their own, raising their hands. They were surrounded by a forest of ghosts. Many ravens and Broken Hand walked their horses down into the camp. They stopped beside Silas. Many ravens looked at Thorn. His gaze was heavy. "You come to this valley. You steal. You break. You leave a good man to die. You have no honor. You have no respect. You are hollow men." We'll leave," Thorn pleaded, his voice a squeak. "Take the furs. We'll go." "You will leave," many ravens said, "but you will not leave as you came." The reckoning was quiet. It was not bloody. The Salish warriors came down. They collected the 4 men's rifles. They collected their knives. They rounded up their horses. They reclaimed Silas's pelts and his horse and his rifle. They stripped Thorn and his men of their coats. They gave them back only their thin shirts. They gave them each 1 blanket, 1 knife, and enough dried meat for 2 days. "It is a long walk back to St. Louis," Silas said. "The wind is from the east. It will be at your back." Thorn looked at him, his eyes filled with a terror that was deeper than the cold. "Go!" many ravens commanded. "Do not let the sun set on you in this valley. Do not return. The mountain is watching, and we are its memory." The 4 men, shamed and broken, turned. They began their long walk, stumbling through the deep snow. They did not look back. The snow fell softly, covering the tracks of Thorn and his men. It was as if they had never been. The valley was quiet again. The Salish warriors did not celebrate. They began the cleanup. They went to the river and pulled the clumsy traps Thorn had set, releasing 2 young beavers that were still alive. They blessed the water. They gathered the wood the men had wasted and built a proper fire. Silas went to the ruin of his lean-to. He found the blackened stock of his rifle. Broken Hand came and stood beside him. "This was your home," Broken Hand said. "It was," Silas said. "They took the pelts, but they broke this. This was my life." "A lodge can be rebuilt," Broken Hand said. "Honor cannot." That night, they stayed. The Salish hunters shared their food with Silas. They did not rebuild his small trapper's lean-to. Instead, a dozen men worked, and in a few hours they had built him a small, strong Salish lodge, made of fallen pines and insulated with moss and earth. It was strong. It would hold against the winter. Silas sat by the new fire with many ravens. His shoulder throbbed, but it was a clean pain now. "Why?" Silas asked the old chief. "Why did you do this? The debt was for me. It was not for 200 hunters." Many ravens looked into the flames. "When you saved my son, you honored his life. When Thorn left you to die, he dishonored the mountain. He dishonored the code that allows us all to live here. This was not about your furs, Sio. This was about the balance." Silas looked at the new lodge, at the pelts returned to him, at the quiet, dignified men who had ridden 100 miles to restore a stranger's honor. He had come to the Bitterroot as a beggar, a ghost. He had come to call in a debt. He realized now that it was never a debt. It was not a tally on a ledger. It was a relationship. It was a bond. Thorn saw the world as things to be taken. The Salish saw it as a family to be protected. Thorn believed power was in his rifle, Silas said, mostly to himself. His spirit was empty, many ravens replied. He had to fill it with noise and greed. But the mountain only speaks in silence. You have always been a listener, Silas. That is why you are our brother. You hear the same song we do. Silas felt the warmth of the fire. He felt the solid strength of the new lodge around him. He had lost a shelter, but he had found a home. He understood that survival in the high country was not about being the strongest or the most clever. It was about not being alone. It was about being part of something larger than yourself. The valley was healing, and so was he. Dawn broke over the Bitterroot peaks, painting the snow in shades of pink and pale blue. The air was sharp, so cold it felt like glass. The Salish hunters prepared to leave. They moved with quiet purpose, gathering their horses, checking their gear. There was no boasting, there was no talk of victory, there was only the quiet satisfaction of a task completed. Silas, his arm bound tight in a sling of soft deer hide, stood before many ravens. His own horse, returned to him, stood patiently. "My lodge is your lodge, many ravens," Silas said, placing his good hand over his heart. "What I have is yours." The old chief smiled. It was a rare, warm thing. "Keep your lodge warm, Sio. The winter will be long. The debt is paid." Silas shook his head. "The debt? I do not think it was ever a debt. It was a friendship." "Yes," many ravens said. He nodded to Broken Hand. "A friendship. That is a stronger thing. That is the bond that holds the world together." Broken Hand clasped Silas's good shoulder. "Heal well, brother. The valley is clean again. Keep it so." Silas watched them ride out, 200 riders moving in a single, silent line. They did not look back. They melted into the morning mist and were gone, leaving only the track of their horses in the snow. Silas was alone again, but he was not lonely. He turned to his new lodge. He had his horse. He had his rifle. He had his furs. The season was not lost. He spent the winter in the valley. He healed. The scar on his shoulder remained, a knot of hard flesh, a reminder. But the valley healed too. The river froze, then thawed. The eagles returned. He trapped, but he trapped differently. He took less. He watched more. He often rode north to the high pass and looked toward the Bitterroot. He was a guardian now, not of pelts, but of the balance. The story of the trapper and the 200 hunters became a legend. It was told in the lodges of the Salish and around the fires at the summer rendezvous. It was a story about honor. But honor in the high, cold places is not a loud thing. It is not vengeance. Vengeance is a hot fire that burns quick and leaves nothing but ash. It is not pride. Pride is a heavy stone that sinks a man in deep water. No, honor is a quiet thing. It is the code. It is remembering a kindness. It is keeping your word when it costs you everything. It is understanding that your life is bound to the lives of others, to the land itself. Elias Thorne believed power came from what he could take. Silas learned that true strength, the kind that endures the winter, comes from the bonds you protect. It comes from the debts you pay and the debts you are owed, all woven together in the great silent spirit of the mountain. If you enjoyed this story, stay a while longer by the fire. The embers are still warm. There are more tales from the high country, where honor rides the wind.